Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The Islamic State's trail of savagery hit home in the U.S. this week. On Tuesday, the jihadist group released a video of the beheading of American journalist Jim Foley. Foley, a Catholic freelance photojournalist for the Boston-based Global Post, went missing in Syria in 2012 while on assignment. The terrorist in the video said Foley's killing was in response to U.S. bombings of ISIS positions, and that the fate of another U.S. journalist, Steven Sotloff, who was also in the video, depended on President Obama's next move. The U.S. on Wednesday launched 14 new airstrikes against the Islamic State. Earlier in the day, the president vowed to relentlessly pursue the terrorists and said the U.S. would, quote, do what must be done to protect our people. Meanwhile, from their New Hampshire home, Foley's bereaved parents, Diane and John, remembered their son for his strength, courage, and love, calling him a martyr for freedom.
It's difficult to find solace at this point in time, but we know Jimmy's free. He's finally free. Yes. And we know he's in God's hands.
In 2011, after being held captive by Gaddafi forces in Libya for several weeks, Foley shared that he and a fellow prisoner prayed the rosary, counting the decades on their knuckles. Foley said that praying made them feel as if they were in conversation with God and not alone. The Pope called the Foley family on Wednesday to express his sympathies. May James Foley rest in peace. Back in Iraq, reports of Islamic State's brutality persist. According to multiple accounts, militants in one Yazidi town rounded up males 13 years and older, shot them, and left them for dead. Later, the terrorists abducted their wives and children. At least 80 people were killed. Another report alleges that 700 Yazidi women were auctioned as sex slaves in Mosul, and that men, Christian men and boys, have been forcibly circumcised there. There was a bit of good news from the region, and we need it. 2 Nineveh Plain villages were liberated by Kurdish forces this week, allowing the Christian population to return. They had deserted the town 2 weeks ago ahead of the jihadi advance. The villages were wrecked and pillaged. Atop the 2 Chaldean Catholic churches, crosses were restored where the flag of ISIS had once flown. Much help is needed for the Christians of Iraq. The Chaldean Catholic Church in the U.S. has set up a fund that will go directly to the Chaldean Church in Iraq. They can be found at helpiraq.org. Back here in the U.S., as nightly protests continue in Ferguson, Missouri, a grand jury is investigating the police shooting death of 18-year-old Michael Brown. Witnesses offer conflicting accounts of what actually happened. Some witnesses claim Brown surrendered when he was shot by Officer Darren Wilson. Others suggest that Brown attacked the officer, who fired in self-defense. According to the Ferguson police, Officer Wilson was badly beaten and may have suffered severe facial injuries, including an eye socket fracture. The August 9th shooting took place when Wilson ordered Brown and a friend to stop walking in the middle of the road. Attorney General Eric Holder visited Ferguson this week to oversee the federal investigation into the matter. We'll discuss it later in the show. And the 2 American aid workers who were infected with the deadly Ebola virus in Africa have been discharged. Earlier this month, Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Reitbull were flown from Liberia to Atlanta's Emory University Hospital after contracting the deadly virus. The 2 were doing missionary work for the Christian group Samaritan's Purse. On Thursday, Brantley thanked those who prayed for his recovery and the medical teams who brought him back to health.
As I lay in my bed in Liberia for the following 9 days, getting sicker and weaker each day, I prayed that God would help me be faithful even in my illness. And I prayed that in my life or in my death, that He would be glorified. I cannot thank you enough for your prayers and your support. But what I can tell you is that I serve a faithful God who answers prayers. through the care of the Samaritan's Purse and SIM missionary team in Liberia, the use of an experimental drug, and the expertise and resources of the healthcare team at Emory University Hospital, God saved my life.
What a great story. Brantley added that he hoped his illness would raise further awareness of the plight of West Africans battling the Ebola epidemic. In Virginia, gay marriage has been put on hold. Without comment, the U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday delayed an appeals court ruling that struck down the Commonwealth's voter-approved law defining traditional marriage. Last week's decision by the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond would have allowed same-sex marriages to begin Thursday. The appeals court ruling was the third such ruling by a federal appeals court. A panel of the Sixth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati recently considered marriage arguments in 6 cases from Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Some legal observers suggest that the Sixth Circuit may be the first to uphold traditional marriage statutes after more than 20 consecutive rulings in the past 8 months, striking them down. Pope Francis ended his historic 5-day visit to South Korea as he began it, calling for peace and forgiveness between North and South Korea. On Monday, the Pope celebrated a mass of reconciliation at Seoul's main cathedral. The South Korean president, as well as some North Korean defectors, were in attendance. The Pope challenged Koreans throughout the peninsula to reject the mindset of suspicion and confrontation. His plea came as the U.S. and South Korea began joint military exercises. North Korea warned that the exercises would result in a merciless preemptive strike against the Allies. The Pope, during his flight home, suggested that he had only a few years left to live. He said, quote, 2 or 3 years and then I'll be off to the Father's house, end quote. He even speculated that he might consider retiring from the papacy like Pope Benedict. 3 relatives of Pope Francis died and a 4th is in serious condition after an auto accident on Tuesday in Argentina. The small car driven by the Pope's 38-year-old nephew, Emmanuel Bergoglio, slammed into the back of a semi-truck. He was hospitalized in serious condition. His wife and 2 sons, aged 2 and 8 months, were killed. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said the Pope was deeply saddened and that the Pope asks all who share in his grief to unite with him in prayer. More about Pope Francis and his comments about force in Iraq later in the program. Protest prayer, a lawsuit, and results. Oklahoma City Archbishop Paul Coakley sued Satanists in an attempt to stop a black mass planned for the Oklahoma City Civic Center in September. Specifically, the Archbishop sought the return of the consecrated host to be used in the black mass. On Thursday, the host was returned to the diocese with a guarantee from the satanic group leader that they would not use a host as part of their scheduled black mass. On Thursday, Archbishop Coakley said in a statement, "I am relieved that we have been able to secure the return of the sacred host and that we've prevented its desecration as part of a planned satanic ritual. I remain concerned about the dark powers and this satanic worship and what it invites into our community and the spiritual danger that this poses to all who are involved in it directly or indirectly. Only ordained Catholic ministers or people approved by their local bishop can handle the consecrated host, according to church law. The Black Mass is scheduled for September 21st. More later on this story. And Cardinal Edmund Sciocca, the American cardinal who served as a top Vatican administrator for more than a decade under John Paul II, has died. Wednesday, he passed away at the age of 86. The Michigan native son of Polish immigrants became a priest in 1954 and later Archbishop of Detroit. He was tapped in the early 1990s to be the Holy See's point man for finance. He demanded strict financial accountability from within and required regular contributions from dioceses worldwide, enabling the Vatican to operate in the black under his leadership. By the end of that decade, he was running one of the world's smallest countries as governor of Vatican City State. He was a friend of this program and EWT, and in fact, it was Cardinal Sciocca who provided us with unprecedented access to the Vatican city-state many, many years ago. He and his feisty spirit will be missed. May Edmund Cardinal Sciocca rest in peace.